One determined single mother's desperate stand to save her fourth-generation family farm from a predatory development company unexpectedly uncovers a devastating water rights conspiracy threatening an entire rural county. All brought to light when the state governor's helicopter makes an unannounced landing in her sunflower field, carrying sealed environmental reports that would not only save her land, but expose 15 years of illegal water diversion schemes reaching into the highest levels of state government. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning dew glistened on the sprawling sunflower fields as Sophia Martinez parked her well-worn pickup truck at the edge of her property. At 42, the resilient single mother had spent every day of her adult life cultivating the 230 acres that her great-grandmother had established during the Great Depression. Now, with foreclosure notices piled on her kitchen table and barely $375 left in her checking account, she faced the unbearable reality of watching her family's legacy auctioned to the highest bidder at today's county land hearing. "Mum, I printed the soil analysis reports," called Emma, her 19-year-old daughter, who had postponed her environmental science scholarship to help save their struggling farm. Her recent return had brought modern agricultural techniques and fresh perspectives, but they had arrived too late to overcome the crippling drought, mounting equipment repair costs, and the predatory loan that had seemed like their only option. 2 years earlier, when Emma's younger brother needed emergency surgery, Sophia nodded gratefully, taking the folder from her daughter's hands. "Thanks, honey. Professor Hernandez's data might not convince the county commissioners, but at least they'll have to acknowledge our water rights were improperly curtailed." The soil samples, analyzed by a respected hydrogeologist from the state university, confirmed that the farm's irrigation access had been systematically reduced despite sitting atop a significant aquifer, one that somehow never appeared in county records. "Look, there's Blake Westfield," Emma whispered, pointing toward a gleaming black SUV with tinted windows pulling into a reserved parking space near the county administrative building. Sophia's expression hardened at the sight of Westview Estates' CEO. The luxury housing developer had been aggressively acquiring distressed agricultural properties throughout Riverdale County for the past 7 years. Local rumors suggested connections to political donors who had mysteriously accelerated zoning changes that transformed generational farmland into sprawling suburban developments with artificial lakes and private golf courses. "He doesn't even glance our way," Sophia observed, as Westfield strode confidently through the building's glass doors, flanked by attorneys in expensive suits. "Man's bought half the county and can't be bothered to look the farmers in the eye as he destroys their livelihood." Inside the county administrative building, the hearing registration desk was already crowded with representatives from investment firms and development companies. Sophia and Emma joined the line, painfully aware they had no realistic chance of preventing the inevitable. Their presence was symbolic, a final act of dignity before surrendering everything they had. "Name?" asked the clerk, without looking up from her computer screen. "Sophia Martinez. I'm here about the Valley Ridge farm property on Highway 23. The clerk frowned, studying her monitor. "I'm sorry, Ms. Martinez, but you're not eligible to participate in today's hearing as a speaker." "What? That's my family's farm being discussed. I have every right to speak." "According to our updated guidelines, individuals with active foreclosure proceedings are limited to written submissions only. You can submit your statement, but you cannot address the commissioners directly." She pushed a visitor badge across the counter. "You're welcome to observe from the designated seating area, but you cannot make verbal comments during the proceedings." Sophia felt her chest tighten with indignation. "That's not right. There's nothing in the county procedures that prevents property owners from speaking. It's a new protocol, the clerk replied mechanically. Implemented last month by the county administrator's office. I'm simply following the guidelines I've been given. Emma stepped forward, her expression calm but determined. We'd like to see documentation of this policy change, please, as a matter of public record. The clerk's professional demeanor wavered momentarily. You'd need to file a formal information request with the records department. I don't have those documents at this station. As they moved away from the registration desk, Emma whispered, That's completely illegal. They can't silence affected property owners without a formal policy amendment and public notice period. Sophia nodded grimly. Doesn't matter if it's illegal, if there's no one to enforce the rules. This whole hearing could be over within an hour. They entered the main chamber where Sophia immediately noticed several unfamiliar faces, men in dark suits positioned near the exits, speaking quietly into earpieces. They seemed out of place among the local officials and familiar county employees, their alert posture suggesting something beyond standard security. Taking seats in the back, Roe mother and daughter reviewed their limited options. Professor Hernandez's soil analysis confirmed their water rights had been improperly restricted, but without official recognition, it carried little legal weight. Their attorney had filed for an emergency injunction, but the hearing wasn't scheduled until next week, far too late to stop today's proceedings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I still don't understand why they're pushing our farm through first, Emma murmured, examining the hearing agenda. There are 4 other properties in worse financial shape than ours, but they've scheduled Valley Ridge as the priority case. Sophia had wondered the same thing. Their farm, while substantial, was less valuable than several others being auctioned today. Yet somehow, Valley Ridge Farm had been flagged for immediate consideration, with the hearing time even moved up from 2 p.m. to 9 a.m. with minimal notice. As the chamber filled, Sophia noticed Blake Westfield engaged in intense conversation with County Administrator Gerald Thompson in a corner. The 2 men repeatedly glanced in their direction, their expressions suggesting annoyance at the farmer's presence. Something's off, Sophia whispered. Westfield looks nervous, not confident. And why would the administrator himself be here? And for a routine foreclosure hearing? Emma was about to respond when her phone vibrated with a text message. Her eyes widened as she read it. Mom, that's from Dr. Hernandez, she whispered urgently. He says we need to check the irrigation maps from 1983 immediately. There's something about our property that wasn't in the soil report. The hearing starts in 15 minutes. He says it's critical, something about the original watershed surveys his team just uncovered. He's sending files to my email now. As Emma accessed her email on her phone, Sophia noticed increased activity near the chamber entrance. The security personnel had suddenly become more alert, positioning themselves strategically around the room. Mom, look at this, Emma whispered, showing her mother the phone screen. It displayed a detailed topographical map with a section along the western boundary of their property highlighted in blue. Accompanying notes referenced primary aquifer access and 1983 State Water Survey deliberately removed from county records. I don't understand, Sophia said, studying the small screen carefully. That section is just where the old well system was before it dried up. According to this data, it didn't dry up naturally, Emma explained, her voice rising with excitement. Our land sits directly above a major aquifer junction that feeds the entire eastern valley. If these surveys are accurate, someone deliberately diverted water away from our property, water that legally belongs to us under state riparian rights laws. Sophia stared at her daughter in disbelief. Why would anyone do that? Control, Emma replied simply. Whoever controls water access in a drought-prone region controls everything: development, agriculture, property values. This could explain why they're so eager to acquire our specific property. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the county administrator at the podium. As he prepared to call the hearing to order, a commotion at the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A county clerk hurried in, whispering urgently to Administrator Thompson. His face paled visibly as he received the message. He quickly approached the podium, signaling for a delay. Through the open doors, Sophia could see unusual activity in the building's lobby. Security personnel moving with purpose, county staff in apparent confusion, and through the glass entrance doors, what appeared to be state police vehicles arriving in the parking lot. "What's happening?" Sophia murmured, rising slightly to get a better view. The administrator cleared his throat, uncomfortably. "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a brief delay to the start of today's proceedings. Please remain seated until further notice." Administrator Thompson approached Blake Westfield, engaging in what appeared to be a heated, whispered exchange. Westfield's confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced by visible agitation as he repeatedly checked his phone and glanced toward the entrance. Minutes later, the atmosphere in the chamber transformed as Governor Eleanor Vasquez entered, accompanied by staff members and what appeared to be officials from the State Water Resources Board. Her presence, completely unexpected at a routine county hearing, sent an immediate ripple of murmurs throughout the audience. Even more surprising was who accompanied her. Retired Judge Raymond Oakes, who had presided over water rights cases for 3 decades before his retirement last year, carrying a leather portfolio stamped with the state seal. The governor approached, the podium, her expression resolute. "Good morning. I apologize for this unexpected intervention, but I'm requesting an immediate suspension of today's proceedings pending an emergency injunction from the State Attorney General's office." Administrator Thompson stepped forward, his forced smile failing to mask his discomfort. "Governor Vasquez, with all due respect, this is a county-level administrative hearing. The state has no standing to intervene at this stage." "That, Administrator Thompson, is precisely what we're here to investigate," the governor replied, her voice carrying throughout the now silent chamber. "It has come to our attention that certain properties scheduled for consideration today, beginning with the Martinez farm, contain critical water resources that were deliberately misclassified in county records." She gestured to Judge Oakes, who stepped forward with dignified purpose. "The judge has provided my office with documents from his personal archives, files he was reviewing before his unexpected retirement last year. These records suggest a systematic effort to conceal critical aquifer access points that would prevent certain properties from being devalued and acquired." Sophia and Emma exchanged astonished glances as the implications became clear. Professor Hernandez's water concerns had only scratched the surface of a much larger issue, one that potentially explained why their once thriving farm had suddenly struggled after decades of productivity. As Governor Vasquez continued addressing the stunned audience, a state trooper approached the Martinezes. "Ms. Martinez, the governor would like to speak with you and your daughter privately before proceeding further." Sophia nodded, her mind racing to process this extraordinary turn of events. What had begun as a last desperate attempt to delay losing her family farm had somehow connected to something much larger, a discovery significant enough to bring the governor herself to a routine county hearing. And somehow, their modest sunflower farm stood at the center of it all. What Sophia Martinez couldn't possibly know as she and Emma followed the trooper toward a private conference room where Governor Vasquez waited with water resource officials and state investigators was that the irrigation maps in Professor Hernandez's files would lead to the unraveling of a decade-long conspiracy involving water rights manipulation, drought profiteering, and corruption that reached into the highest levels of county government. The single mother who had arrived that morning, prepared to lose everything, was about to become the key figure in exposing a scandal that would transform the future of the entire region and, in the process, reveal the true value of the land her family had stewarded for 4 generations, a value that had nothing to do with housing developments and everything to do with water security in an increasingly drought-prone state. The conference room door closed behind Sophia and Emma as they joined Governor Vasquez, Judge Oaks, and several officials they didn't recognize. The sudden shift from facing imminent loss to sitting across from the state's highest elected official left Sophia momentarily speechless. "Ms. Martinez," Governor Vasquez began, her tone direct but compassionate, "I understand this must be overwhelming. Let me explain why we're here." She nodded to a woman in professional attire who stepped forward. "This is Director Camila Rodriguez from the State Water Resources Board. 6 weeks ago, her office received anonymous documentation suggesting systematic water rights violations throughout Riverdale County." Director Rodriguez placed several maps on the conference table. "We began a discreet investigation that led us to an unsettling pattern. Several family farms experiencing natural water shortages were actually sitting atop major aquifer access points, access deliberately obscured in county records. Judge Oaks opened his leather portfolio, removing yellowed documents. "When I presided over water rights cases, I maintained copies of all original surveys. When Director Rodriguez approached me about inconsistencies in current county records, I found these original surveys from 1983. He placed the documents beside the modern maps, the differences immediately apparent. What appeared as minimal water access on current county records showed as primary aquifer junction on the original surveys. "Your farm, Ms. Martinez," continued the governor, "sits above what hydrologists call the keystone access point, the primary junction where 3 underground water systems converge. Whoever controls your property essentially controls water access for the eastern half of the county." Emma leaned forward, her environmental science background allowing her to immediately grasp the implications. "That's why our wells started failing 2 years ago, not because of natural drought conditions, but because someone was deliberately diverting the water," Director Rodriguez confirmed. "We've discovered a sophisticated pumping system installed on adjacent county property 3 years ago, precisely when your farm began experiencing unexplained irrigation problems." Sophia struggled to process this information. "You're saying someone deliberately drove us toward foreclosure by cutting off our water? But why? Westview Estates builds luxury homes, not water treatment facilities." The governor exchanged glances with her team before responding. "We have reason to believe Westview Estates is actually a shell corporation for Meridian Resource Holdings, a multinational company that has been quietly acquiring water rights across drought-vulnerable regions for the past decade." She continued, "Their strategy is remarkably consistent. Identify properties with critical water access, create artificial hardship through administrative means or direct intervention, acquire the devalued land at foreclosure prices, then control regional water access during drought periods, which essentially allows them to control everything," Emma concluded, her expression darkening with understanding. "In a drought-prone region, whoever controls the water controls all development, agriculture, and ultimately politics." Judge Oaks nodded gravely. "I began noticing suspicious patterns in water rights cases shortly before my health issues prompted my early retirement. Curiously, those health concerns disappeared immediately after I stopped investigating these cases." The implication hung heavily in the air. The judge had potentially been pressured or threatened into retirement when he began uncovering the scheme. "What happens now?" Sophia asked, her farmer's practicality asserting itself amid the shocking revelations. immediate suspension of all foreclosure proceedings on potentially affected properties, Governor Vasquez explained. The State Attorney General has issued emergency injunctions while we conduct a comprehensive investigation into water rights manipulation throughout the county. Director Rodriguez added, "We've already deployed hydrologists to verify the underground water systems and document any artificial diversion infrastructure. And our farm," Emma pressed, the question foremost in both their minds. "If our findings confirm what we suspect," the governor replied, "your foreclosure will be invalidated due to evidence of deliberate resource tampering. Moreover, as the owners of a property with critical water infrastructure, you would be eligible for significant state conservation payments, essentially compensation for maintaining and protecting an essential public resource." For the first time in years, Sophia felt a glimmer of genuine hope, not just a temporary reprieve, but the possibility of sustainable security for the farm she had fought so hard to maintain. As they continued discussing next steps, a commotion outside the conference room drew their attention. Through the glass panel, they could see Administrator Thompson being escorted from the building by state police officers, his expression a mixture of indignation and barely concealed panic. Nearby, Blake Westfield was engaged in intense conversation with individuals who appeared to be his attorneys, gesturing frantically toward papers being presented by state officials. "Things are moving quickly," Governor Vasquez observed. "The evidence we've gathered was compelling enough for the Attorney General to authorize immediate action. Several county officials have already indicated willingness to cooperate in exchange. For consideration," Sophia turned to Judge Oakes, emotion tightening her voice, "I don't know how to thank you for coming forward with those surveys." "Sometimes justice requires ordinary people to do extraordinary things," the judge replied. "Simply, I spent my career upholding water rights law. I couldn't stand by watching it be systematically undermined, regardless of personal risk." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sophia was surprised to see her bank loan officer, Michael Reynolds, entering the county building, looking both confused and concerned. The banker was immediately approached by one of the governor's aides, who began explaining the situation in animated terms. "Interesting how quickly financial institutions adjust their positions when fraud investigations begin," Director Rodriguez noted with a slight smile. "Your loan status will likely become much more flexible in the coming days, Ms. Martinez." By late afternoon, the implications of the morning's events had spread throughout Riverdale County. Local news crews gathered outside the administrative building, reporting on what they described as potentially the most extensive water rights fraud scheme in state history. Sophia and Emma watched the coverage from the governor's temporary office, still processing the dramatic reversal of their fortunes. State investigators have confirmed initial findings supporting allegations that critical water resources were deliberately manipulated to devalue certain agricultural properties, announced a television reporter standing outside the county building. Sources close to the investigation suggest this scheme may have affected dozens of farms and involved millions in fraudulent acquisitions. As Sophia watched the report, her phone rang, the fifth call that hour from neighboring farmers facing similar foreclosure situations. Word had spread quickly that Sophia Martinez, the single mother who had arrived that morning expecting to lose everything, now stood at the center of a case that might save not just her land, but numerous other family farms throughout the county. What Sophia couldn't possibly know, as she fielded questions from suddenly respectful bank representatives and scheduled meetings with water resource officials, was that the modest sunflower farm she had fought so desperately to save would soon be recognized as one of the most strategically significant water management properties in the region. Nor could she anticipate how Judge Oakes's courageous decision to preserve those original surveys would transform not just Valley Ridge Farm's future, but the environmental and economic direction of the entire county for generations to come. The determined single mother, who had been deliberately silenced at her own foreclosure hearing, had unwittingly become the catalyst for exposing corruption that reached into the highest levels of county government. All because a governor's helicopter had landed in her sunflower field, carrying evidence that halted not just a hearing, but an entire criminal enterprise built on water rights manipulation. The conference room of the Riverdale County Administration Building, normally reserved for mundane bureaucratic meetings, had transformed into the command center for what state officials were now calling Operation Watershed. Governor Eleanor Vasquez, seated at the head of the table, directed a team that had grown to include state prosecutors, environmental specialists, and forensic accountants. "Ms. Martinez," the governor addressed Sophia directly, "we need to understand exactly when your irrigation problems began. The timeline is crucial to establishing the pattern of manipulation." Sophia straightened in her chair, still adjusting to being treated as a key witness rather than a failing farmer. 3 seasons ago, almost to the day, we'd had consistent water access for decades, even during previous droughts. Then suddenly, our well output dropped by 60%. The county water inspector said it was just the drought affecting the water table. Emma opened her laptop, pulling up meticulous records she'd kept since returning to the farm. "I've tracked every water reading since I came home. The decline doesn't follow natural drought patterns. There are sharp drops that correspond with no precipitation changes." Director Rodriguez nodded, confirming their suspicions. "Those drops likely coincide with the activation of diversion infrastructure. Our preliminary investigation suggests sophisticated pumping equipment was installed on 3 adjacent properties, all acquired by different shell companies that ultimately trace back to Meridian Resource Holdings." "The geographical pattern is unmistakable," added Dr. Lawrence Chen, the state's hydrogeology expert, as he displayed a topographical map on the conference room screen. "When mapped together, these properties form a strategic perimeter around the primary aquifer junction. Controlling these specific parcels would effectively allow private control of water distribution for the Eastern Valley." Sophia studied the map, her farmer's knowledge of the land bringing immediate recognition. "Those are all family farms that went under in the past few years. The Johnsons, the Blackwells, the Diaz Place, all multi-generation operations that suddenly couldn't sustain themselves. None of this would have been possible without inside help," stated Attorney General Rachel Montgomery, who had arrived 30 minutes earlier. "County records don't simply alter themselves, and water diversion infrastructure can't be installed without permits and inspections." Judge Oakes cleared his throat. "When I began noticing discrepancies in water rights cases, Administrator Thompson personally intervened to reassign those cases to other judges. When I persisted in asking questions, I began experiencing concerning health issues that mysteriously resolved after my retirement." The implication hung heavy in the room. The respected judge may have been deliberately poisoned or exposed to substances that mimicked illness when he got too close to uncovering the scheme. "We've secured warrants for all relevant county records," the Attorney General continued, "but we suspect key documentation may have been deliberately destroyed. What we need is evidence of the actual diversion infrastructure, something physical and undeniable." Emma exchanged glances with her mother before speaking up. "There's an unusual concrete structure on county land that borders our western field. It appeared about 3 years ago, supposedly for flood control. My environmental science professor thought it looked more like a pumping station than anything related to flood management. This new information energized the team. Governor Vasquez immediately authorized a specialized inspection team to examine the structure, while Director Rodriguez coordinated with hydraulic engineers who could identify any disguised water management equipment. While those teams deploy, we need to understand the full extent of affected properties, the governor directed. Ms. Martinez, are there other farmers experiencing similar drought impacts who still maintain ownership of their land? Sophia thought carefully. At least 7 farms in our valley have reported unusual water problems in recent years. The Carson Organic Dairy, the Williams Vegetable Operation, Garza Family Orchards. She named several others, Emma quickly mapping their locations. They form a secondary perimeter, Dr. Chen observed, as the locations appeared on the digital map. These properties would be the next targets after your farm. Together, they would complete control of the entire eastern watershed. As they strategized next steps, a state police officer entered with urgent news. Governor, we've received reports that individuals at Westview Estates offices are shredding documents. We have teams en route, but thought you should know immediately. Expedite the document preservation orders, the Attorney General instructed her staff, and inform Mr. Westfield that obstruction of justice charges will be pursued against anyone destroying potential evidence. The rapid developments created an atmosphere of focused urgency. Sophia, who had arrived that morning expecting to lose everything, now found herself at the center of an operation that grew more significant with each passing hour. "Mom," Emma whispered as officials coordinated around them. "Do you realize what this means? They weren't after our land for housing developments. They wanted control of the water. In a drought-prone region, that's more valuable than gold." Sophia nodded solemnly. The realization that her modest sunflower farm sat atop what amounted to an underground water reservoir explained why Westview had been so determined to acquire it, even when more valuable properties were available. It wasn't about building homes. It was about controlling the most essential resource in an increasingly water-scarce region. As the investigation accelerated, Governor Vasquez pulled Sophia aside. "Ms. Martinez, I want to be transparent about what comes next. This investigation will attract significant media attention. Your farm will become the focal point of a story that extends far beyond Riverdale County." "I'm not concerned about attention," Sophia replied, with the direct manner of someone accustomed to facing challenges head-on. "I'm concerned about saving our farm and helping our neighbors who've been victimized by this scheme." The governor nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the perspective we need. This isn't just about one property or even one county. What we're uncovering here appears to be part of a larger strategy being implemented in drought-vulnerable regions across the state. Your stand may have implications far beyond what any of us initially realized." Just then, Director Rodriguez received an urgent call from the inspection team at the concrete structure Emma had identified. Her expression confirmed their suspicions. Before she even spoke, "They've found it," she announced to the room. "Sophisticated pumping equipment disguised as flood control infrastructure. The system is currently active, diverting an estimated 300,000 gallons daily from the aquifer junction. They're documenting everything and have secured the facility." This physical evidence provided the undeniable proof they needed. The Attorney General immediately authorized expanded search warrants for both county offices and Westview Estates headquarters. As state police units mobilized for these coordinated searches, Sophia's phone rang. Her neighbor, Eduardo Garza, whose family orchard had been struggling with unexplained water shortages. "Sophia, there are news vans at the county building saying something about water rights fraud. Is this related to what happened at your hearing?" His voice carried the cautious hope of someone afraid to believe good news after years of struggle. "Eduardo, you need to come to the county building immediately," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Bring your water test results and any documentation of when your irrigation problems started. The governor is here, and what we're discovering affects your orchard too." As she ended the call, Emma approached with her laptop. "Mom, I've been cross-referencing our soil moisture data with satellite imagery from the university's environmental monitoring program. Look at this pattern." The screen displayed a time-lapse visualization showing moisture levels across the county over the past 5 years, the gradual drying of specific properties. All family farms targeted by Westview was clearly visible, while adjacent county-owned land maintained consistent moisture levels despite supposed drought conditions. "This is visual confirmation of targeted water diversion," Emma explained to the officials who gathered around. "These patterns don't occur naturally. They show deliberate, controlled reduction of water access to specific properties." Dr. Chen immediately recognized the significance. "This satellite data provides historical documentation we feared had been destroyed in county records. It confirms both the timeline and the selective nature of the water reduction." As the evidence mounted, Blake Westfield arrived at the county building, accompanied by corporate attorneys. Rather than his usual confident demeanor, he appeared visibly agitated upon seeing the governor's team established in the conference room. Attorney General Montgomery intercepted him in the hallway. "Mr. Westfield, we have a series of questions regarding Westview Estate's relationship with Meridian Resource Holdings and the water management infrastructure installed on recently acquired properties." "I have no comment at this time," Westfield replied stiffly. "Any questions should be directed to our legal department. I'm here simply to observe a routine county hearing." "That hearing has been indefinitely suspended," the Attorney General informed him coolly. "And I should mention that we've secured the pumping facility on county land adjacent to the Martinez farm. Our engineers are currently documenting its operational capacity and water diversion capabilities." The color drained from Westfield's face, confirmation, if any was needed, of his awareness of the illicit infrastructure. "Furthermore," she continued, "we've just received judicial authorization to access all communication between Westview Estates and county officials regarding water rights classifications over the past 7 years. I suggest you consider the benefits of cooperative disclosure as our investigation proceeds." As Westfield retreated with his legal team for private consultation, the governor's press secretary was preparing for a public statement. The developments had escalated beyond a private investigation. The public needed to be informed about potential water rights violations that affected entire communities. For Sophia Martinez, the whirlwind of the past few hours had transformed her from a desperate, farmer-facing foreclosure to a pivotal figure in uncovering what appeared to be the largest water rights conspiracy in state history. Her small office at the back of the farmhouse, where she had spent countless nights worrying over bills and bank notices, now seemed a distant memory compared to the command center of state officials mobilizing around her family's cause. By mid-afternoon, Eduardo Garza had arrived along with 5 other farmers experiencing similar water issues. Each brought documentation that, when combined, created a compelling pattern of coordinated resource manipulation affecting specific agricultural properties in sequence. It wasn't just bad luck or climate change, realized Maria Williams, whose vegetable farm had been operating at reduced capacity for 2 seasons. They were deliberately drying us out, making our operations unsustainable so we'd be forced to sell. As the farmers shared their experiences, they discovered disturbing similarities. Each had been visited by the same county water inspector who documented natural drought impacts on their properties. Each had been approached by different investment groups offering to purchase their struggling farms at significantly reduced values. And each property, when marked on Dr. Chen's hydrological map, formed part of the strategic perimeter around the aquifer system. They weren't just buying random farms, Eduardo observed, studying the map with growing indignation. They were assembling a water empire piece by piece, using our financial hardship as leverage. Director Rodriguez nodded grimly. This strategy has been documented in other regions facing water scarcity. The approach is remarkably consistent. Identify critical water access points, manipulate local regulations or infrastructure to devalue those properties, acquire them at distressed prices, then control regional water resources during peak demand periods. Essentially creating artificial scarcity of a public resource, then profiting from that scarcity, Emma added, her environmental science background helping translate the technical aspects for the gathered farmers. Governor Vasquez rejoined the group after coordinating with state agencies. We've established an emergency response team to address immediate agricultural water needs while the investigation proceeds. Technicians will begin disabling unauthorized diversion equipment this afternoon, which should begin restoring natural water flow to affected properties within 72 hours. For the gathered farmers, this news represented the first tangible hope after years of inexplicable struggle, the possibility of returning to sustainable operations after seasons of desperation brought visible emotion to these typically stoic individuals. "What about our loans and pending foreclosures?" asked Carson, the dairy farmer whose operation had been reduced to half its previous capacity due to water limitations. The State Banking Commission has issued emergency guidance to all financial institutions regarding loans affected by the water rights investigation, explained the governor's financial advisor. All foreclosure proceedings on potentially affected properties are suspended pending resolution of the investigation. As they discussed recovery steps, Attorney General Montgomery entered with breaking news. The search of county records has uncovered communication between Administrator Thompson and executives at Meridian Resource Holdings dating back 8 years, well before Westview Estates began operating in the region. She continued, "More significantly, we've discovered financial transfers from offshore accounts linked to Meridian into trust funds benefiting Thompson and 3 county commissioners. The amounts correspond directly with key zoning decisions and water rights reclassifications. This evidence of direct corruption confirmed their worst suspicions about the depth of the conspiracy. What had begun as an investigation into water rights manipulation had expanded into public corruption charges against multiple county officials. Blake Westfield, upon learning of the recovered documentation, had apparently made a strategic decision. His attorneys had approached the Attorney General's team requesting a private meeting to discuss potential cooperative disclosure. His cooperation may provide valuable information about Meridian's larger strategy, noted the Attorney General. But make no mistake, this doesn't exempt him from accountability for his role in the scheme. Late afternoon brought another significant development. The inspection team examining the concrete flood control structure had discovered not just pumping equipment, but a sophisticated electronic system that could be remotely controlled to selectively distribute water to specific properties. This explains why neighboring properties owned by Westview maintained lush landscapes while family farms withered, Dr. Chen explained, reviewing the technical specifications. The system allowed precise control over who received water access and when. It's essentially weaponized water management. As documentation of this infrastructure spread across local and then national news outlets, the full scope of the conspiracy began to resonate beyond Riverdale County. Other agricultural regions reported similar patterns of family farms experiencing unexplained water problems, followed by targeted acquisition attempts by development companies. For Sophia Martinez, watching these revelations unfold created a mixture of vindication and astonishment. The seemingly isolated struggles of her sunflower farm connected to something far larger than she had ever imagined. "I kept thinking it was my failure," she confided to Governor Vasquez during a quiet moment as teams continued working around them. "That I wasn't skilled enough or hard-working enough to keep the farm going during tough times. I never imagined our problems were being deliberately engineered. That's precisely why these schemes succeed," the governor replied with genuine empathy. "They rely on good people blaming themselves rather than questioning the system. Your persistence revealed what many others couldn't see." By evening, the governor's office had established a coordinated response involving multiple state agencies. Environmental teams were assessing damage to the aquifer system. Agricultural specialists were developing recovery plans for affected farms. Legal teams were preparing what would likely become one of the largest water rights cases in state history. As Sophia and Emma prepared to return home for the night, their first trip back to the farm since the dramatic events began that morning, they found a gathering of neighbors waiting at the end of their driveway. Word had spread throughout the community and dozens of local families had assembled in a spontaneous show of support. Hand-painted signs expressed their solidarity: Martinez strong, water rights, human rights, family farms forever. As Sophia's truck approached, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Manuel Diaz, who had lost his farm to Westview 2 years earlier, stepped forward as Sophia parked. "We just heard what happened, what you and Emma uncovered." His voice cracked with emotion. "You stood up when the rest of us had given up. You may have saved what's left of our farming community." Breathes Etuzin. Sophia, exhausted from the day's intensity, but moved by this unexpected support, embraced her longtime neighbor. This isn't over yet, but Governor Vasquez believes there may be grounds to invalidate sales that were based on manipulated water access. Some families might get their land back. This possibility that farms already lost might somehow be recovered sent a wave of cautious hope through the gathered community. For many, it represented the first glimmer of justice after years of watching their agricultural heritage systematically dismantled by forces they hadn't understood. As darkness fell across the sunflower fields, news helicopters circled overhead, capturing aerial footage of what journalists were now calling ground zero of the water rights scandal. National news networks had picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath narrative of a single mother farmer standing against corporate water manipulation. Inside their farmhouse kitchen, Sophia and Emma watched the coverage with a mixture of awe and discomfort at their sudden prominence. The farm that had been on the brink of foreclosure that morning was now being described as the property that exposed a statewide conspiracy. "Do you think we'll actually keep the farm?" Emma asked softly, voicing the question that remained despite the day's revelations. Sophia wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, gazing out at the fields illuminated by moonlight and distant camera lights. "This morning I had no hope at all. Now at least we're fighting with the truth on our side. And we're not fighting alone anymore." What neither of them could fully appreciate as they finally allowed themselves to rest after the most extraordinary day of their lives was how profoundly the events set in motion would transform not just their farm's future, but water rights policy across the state and potentially the nation. The determined single mother, who had been silenced at her own foreclosure hearing, had unwittingly become the catalyst for exposing a sophisticated scheme to monopolize the most essential resource in an increasingly water-stressed world. And her sunflower fields, nearly lost to corporate acquisition, would soon become symbolic ground in a much larger battle over who controls the water that sustains both agriculture and human communities in an era of increasing scarcity. 3 days after the dramatic halting of the county hearing, Sophia Martinez stood at the edge of her western field, watching as state environmental engineers dismantled the hidden pumping system that had been secretly diverting water from beneath her family's land. The sophisticated equipment, looking so innocuous from the surface, had stolen more than water. It had nearly stolen their entire legacy. "It's hard to believe something so small caused so much damage," Sophia remarked to Governor Vasquez, who had returned to oversee the critical phase of the investigation. "That's how the most effective schemes operate," the governor replied, her expression somber yet determined. "They hide in plain sight, looking so ordinary that no one questions their presence until the damage is already done." The equipment itself told a damning story. German-manufactured components not available on the commercial market, specially designed for covert water management operations, with serial numbers that traced directly to Meridian Resource Holdings through a labyrinth of offshore purchases. Once the diversion equipment is fully disabled, natural aquifer flow should begin restoring within 48 to 72 hours, explained Dr. Chen, studying readings on his tablet. "We've installed monitoring systems at key points to document the recovery process. Your well production should show measurable improvement by the end of the week." For Sophia, this tangible resolution to the water shortage meant more than all the legal proceedings combined. Water returning to her land represented the possibility of genuine recovery, of crops flourishing again, of sustainable livelihood, of preserving the agricultural heritage her great-grandmother had established during the Great Depression. Emma approached, her expression bright with purpose, after spending the morning with university researchers documenting soil moisture levels across the property. "The underground sensors are all in place," she reported. "We'll have real-time data showing how quickly the aquifer recharges once the diversion stops completely." While the technical operation unfolded at the pumping site, a parallel investigation accelerated at the county administrative building. Forensic accountants from the State Treasury Department meticulously reconstructed financial transactions between county officials and various shell companies linked to Westview Estates. "We've identified 37 separate transfers," reported Auditor Maria Gonzalez during the mid-morning briefing in the mobile command center established on Sophia's property. Each corresponds precisely with key administrative decisions regarding water rights reclassifications or zoning changes affecting targeted agricultural properties. Attorney General Montgomery nodded grimly, adding these findings to the growing evidence portfolio. "And the communication records? Even more revealing," confirmed her chief investigator, displaying recovered emails on the secure monitor. "We've recovered correspondence between Administrator Thompson and Meridian executives dating back nearly a decade. They explicitly discuss identifying strategic acquisition targets with optimal subterranean access points, corporate euphemisms for farms sitting atop crucial aquifer junctions." The investigation had expanded to include state banking regulators, who discovered that certain financial institutions had received preferential treatment on commercial development permits in exchange for accelerating farm foreclosures on properties identified by Westview Estates. "It's a closed system of corruption," observed Director Rodriguez. "Banks pressure farmers with impossible loan terms. County officials reject water rights claims that would ease financial pressure, and developers wait to acquire distressed properties at fractions of their true value." As the morning progressed, Blake Westfield had transitioned from defiance to strategic cooperation. Facing potential federal charges related to resource manipulation, he had begun providing detailed information about Meridian's larger strategy. in exchange for consideration in the charging process. Westfield has confirmed our primary suspicion, the Attorney General informed Governor Vasquez during a private consultation. Westview Estates was never actually planning to build the massive housing developments shown in their promotional materials. Those plans were essentially facades, designed to justify acquiring specific properties while disguising the true objective: controlling the region's water resources. The governor processed this confirmation with measured anger. So, the luxury homes, the golf courses, the economic development promises to the county, all elaborate fiction? Precisely. Once they secured control of the aquifer system, they planned to discover that full development wasn't environmentally feasible. They would then pivot to positioning themselves as responsible environmental stewards while establishing private control over water distribution throughout the Eastern Valley, creating artificial scarcity, then profiting from managing that scarcity. The governor concluded, the strategy now crystal clear. And with climate projections showing increased drought patterns over the next decades, water would become increasingly valuable, a private commodity rather than a public resource. This revelation transformed the understanding of what Sophia Martinez had unwittingly exposed. What had begun as an investigation into local corruption had expanded into a case study of how essential natural resources could be systematically privatized through manipulation of regulatory systems, financial pressures, and strategic infrastructure. Around noon, a different kind of activity began at Valley Ridge Farm. The small community of farmers who had gathered in solidarity the previous evening had returned, this time with equipment, supplies, and determination to help restore Sophia's operation while their own water access began recovering. Eduardo Garza arrived with his sons and their irrigation expertise. The Williams family brought seedlings from their greenhouse operation. The Carson Dairy provided organic compost. What began as individual gestures of support evolved into an impromptu community restoration project, with dozens of local families contributing what they could to help revitalize the farm that had become symbolic of their collective struggle. "We can't just wait for the investigation to fix everything," explained Manuel Diaz, who was coordinating the volunteer efforts. "Sophia stood up for all of us. Now we need to make sure her farm survives while the legal process unfolds." For Emma, watching neighbors she had known since childhood working together across her mother's fields brought an unexpected emotional impact. Her environmental science education had taught her about sustainable agriculture and community resilience as academic concepts. Now she was witnessing those principles embodied in direct community action, knowledge sharing, resource pooling, and mutual support, creating strength in the face of corporate exploitation. "This is what they couldn't account for in their calculations," she remarked to Professor Hernandez, who had arrived with additional university resources. "They measured water flow, property values, legal vulnerabilities, but they couldn't quantify community bonds or the human determination to preserve a way of life." The professor nodded thoughtfully. "The most sophisticated corporate strategies often fail precisely because they reduce complex human systems to financial algorithms. They see resources but miss relationships." By mid-afternoon, a development occurred that would permanently alter the trajectory of the water rights investigation. A county clerk who had worked in records management for 27 years came forward with critical information. She had maintained private copies of original water surveys dating back to 1965, documents that had been systematically removed from official records during the past decade. "I always thought there was something strange about the records purge," she explained to investigators, "when Administrator Thompson ordered the destruction of outdated water surveys. I made copies first. Something told me those documents might be important someday." These preserved historical records provided irrefutable evidence of the deliberate manipulation of water rights classifications. Side-by-side comparison with current county records showed precise, strategic alterations that consistently disadvantaged family farms while benefiting properties later acquired by shell companies linked to Westview estates. "This is the documentary Smoking Gun," Attorney General Montgomery announced after reviewing the preserved surveys. "We now have conclusive evidence of intentional records falsification concerning critical public resources." As this evidence was secured, national media attention intensified. What had begun as a local corruption story had evolved into a compelling narrative about water rights, corporate resource acquisition, and rural community resistance that resonated far beyond Riverdale County. Sophia found herself navigating this unexpected spotlight with the same straightforward approach she applied to farming challenges. When reporters asked complicated questions about legal proceedings or corporate structures, she redirected to the essential truth at the center of the situation. "This isn't just about my farm," she explained to a television crew documenting the community restoration efforts. "It's about who controls the water we all depend on. If corporations can manipulate access to essential resources, then family farms don't stand a chance, and neither do the communities they feed." Her authentic perspective, unfiltered by public relations considerations, created a narrative, clarity that resonated with audiences nationwide. The image of a single mother farmer standing against corporate water manipulation struck a chord that transcended typical political divisions, uniting concerns about environmental protection, agricultural preservation, and corporate accountability. By late afternoon, the governor had called a press conference on the farm to provide official updates on the investigation. Standing before sunflower fields with Sophia and Emma beside her, she addressed the assembled media. "Today, I'm announcing the formation of a special state task force on water rights protection," Governor Vasquez began. "What we've uncovered in Riverdale County appears to be part of a larger pattern of corporate attempts to gain control of critical water resources through manipulation of local regulations, targeted acquisition of key properties, and deliberate misrepresentation of development intentions." She continued, "We have confirmed that sophisticated water diversion equipment was installed on public land to artificially reduce water access to specific family farms, creating financial hardship that facilitated their acquisition at devalued prices. This represents not just corruption, but a fundamental threat to our agricultural communities and public control of essential natural resources." The governor then addressed broader implications. "I have directed the Attorney General to expand this investigation to 3 additional counties where similar patterns of agricultural distress and targeted development have been reported. We have reason to believe what we've discovered here represents a systematic strategy being implemented in multiple water-sensitive regions across our state." As cameras captured her words for national broadcast, Governor Vasquez made the announcement that would transform Sophia Martinez from reluctant witness to policy pioneer. "I'm also announcing the creation of the Agricultural Water Security Initiative, with Ms. Sophia Martinez serving as its first civilian advisory chair. This program will develop comprehensive protections for water resources supporting family farms and create early intervention protocols to identify potential manipulation of agricultural water access." The governor's pronouncement caught Sophia completely by surprise. She had envisioned returning to farming once the investigation stabilized her water rights, not stepping into a public policy role that would extend her influence far beyond Valley Ridge Farm. After the press conference concluded, she sought clarification in a private moment with the governor. "I'm not a policy expert or public speaker," Sophia expressed with characteristic directness. "I'm just a farmer who wanted to save her land." Governor Vasquez smiled with understanding. "That's precisely why you're the perfect person for this role. Agricultural policy has been dominated by corporate interests and urban perspectives for too long. We need the authentic voice of a working farmer who understands what's at stake when water resources are threatened. Your practical experience is more valuable than any academic credentials." As Sophia considered this unexpected opportunity, Emma expressed enthusiastic support. "Mom, this is how we ensure what happened to us doesn't happen to others. Your perspective could help shape protections that would benefit family farms across the state." The potential to transform her personal struggle into systemic change for other agricultural families resonated with Sophia's deep sense of responsibility to the land and community. Despite her reservations about public speaking, the possibility of creating meaningful protections for other farmers facing similar challenges aligned with her fundamental values. "I'll do it," she decided, "if I can remain based here and continue farming while serving in this role. I can't advise on agricultural reality if I'm not living it every day." The governor readily agreed to these terms, understanding that Sophia's authenticity derived precisely from her continued connection to the practical realities of family farming. As evening approached, Sophia took a rare moment of solitude, walking alone through the fields her great-grandmother had first planted, nearly a century earlier. The land that had been on the brink of foreclosure just days ago now stood at the center of a transformative movement for water rights protection and agricultural preservation. The western field, where technicians had spent the day disabling the hidden pumping system, held particular significance. For years, she had blamed herself for failing to make this section productive, believing her farming skills inadequate to overcome what she thought were natural drought conditions. Now she understood that no amount of agricultural expertise could have overcome the deliberate diversion happening beneath the surface. "You would be proud," she whispered, thinking of her great-grandmother who had established the farm during another time of crisis. That remarkable woman had created something, enduring from nothing during the Great Depression. Sophia now had the opportunity to preserve that legacy for future generations, not just for her own family, but potentially for agricultural communities throughout the state. As the sun began to set, Emma joined her mother in the field, silently, standing beside her as they watched golden light transform the landscape. The bond between them had evolved through this crisis, mother and daughter becoming partners in something far larger than either had imagined when Emma had returned home to help save the struggling farm. "Do you think we'll actually win this?" Emma asked softly, voicing the uncertainty that remained despite the day's promising developments. Sophia wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, gazing out at the land that represented both their heritage and their future. "I don't know if anyone ever truly wins against forces this powerful," she replied honestly. "But we've already accomplished something important. We've exposed the truth. And sometimes making the truth visible is the most powerful thing ordinary people can do." As they walked back toward the farmhouse, they passed volunteers still working to restore irrigation systems damaged by years of artificial water deprivation. The community that had gathered around their cause represented something the corporate strategy had failed to account for: the profound human connections that existed beyond financial calculations and resource algorithms. Inside the kitchen, Sophia found Judge Oakes engaged in conversation with Professor Hernandez and Director Rodriguez. The unlikely alliance of judicial, academic, and governmental expertise that had formed around her farm's crisis reflected how interconnected these seemingly separate domains actually were when addressing fundamental resource issues. "We were just discussing next steps," Judge Oakes explained as Sophia joined them at the table. The evidence uncovered today substantially strengthens the legal case. Administrator Thompson and 2 county commissioners have already indicated willingness to provide testimony in exchange for reduced charges. Blake Westfield has been cooperating as well, added Director Rodriguez. He's providing detailed information about Meridian's operations in other regions, apparently hoping to minimize his own exposure by demonstrating value as a witness. "What about our neighboring farms?" Sophia asked, her concern extending beyond her own property. Eduardo, the Carsons, the Williams family, they've all been experiencing the same water problems. The emergency orders the governor signed this afternoon cover all properties potentially affected by the diversion scheme, confirmed Judge Oakes. Their foreclosure proceedings are suspended pending full investigation, and teams will begin assessing their water access restoration needs tomorrow. This news, that neighboring families might also recover from the damage inflicted by the water manipulation scheme, brought Sophia more satisfaction than any personal vindication. The farms surrounding Valley Ridge represented multi-generational, agricultural heritage, embodying knowledge and practices that once lost could never be fully recovered. As darkness fell, the day's activities gradually wound down. The technical teams established monitoring equipment to document the aquifer recovery process. The volunteers completed emergency restoration work on the most damaged fields. The media, crews captured final footage of sunflowers silhouetted against the setting sun, a visual metaphor for resilience that would accompany news reports nationwide. Later that evening, after most visitors had departed, Sophia sat on the farmhouse porch with Emma, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 3 days. From the desperate drive to the county hearing, expecting inevitable loss, to the astonishing intervention of the governor and the subsequent unraveling of the water rights conspiracy, it seemed almost unbelievable. "I keep thinking about that moment when they told us we couldn't speak at the hearing," Sophia mused. "How close we came to simply accepting that and walking away." Emma nodded, understanding the significance of that pivotal moment. Sometimes the most important decision is simply refusing to be silenced, even when you don't know if speaking up will make any difference. As they sat in comfortable silence, the distant hum of monitoring equipment from the western field provided audible confirmation that the recovery process had begun. The water that had been deliberately diverted from their land for years would soon return, not through magical intervention, but through the restoration of natural processes that had been maliciously disrupted. What Sophia Martinez couldn't fully appreciate as she prepared to retire after the most extraordinary 3 days of her life was how her personal stand against foreclosure had connected to something much larger, a growing national conversation about water security, corporate resource acquisition, and the future of rural agricultural communities in an era of increasing environmental pressure. The single mother who had been silenced at her own foreclosure hearing had found her voice, and in doing so, had given voice to countless other agricultural families facing similar, previously invisible threats to their way of life. Her sunflower farm, nearly lost to corporate acquisition, would soon become known as the birthplace of a new approach to agricultural water protection, one that recognized the essential connection between family farming, community sustainability, and public control of increasingly precious natural resources. As Sophia drifted toward sleep that night, her awareness focused on the tangible improvements already underway. The disabled pumping station, the community restoration efforts, the monitoring systems documenting the aquifer's recovery. These concrete steps towards saving her family's legacy provided immediate satisfaction after years of struggle. Yet the ripple effects of her stand extended far beyond Valley Ridge Farm, influencing policy discussions, corporate accountability, measures, and public awareness in ways that would only become fully apparent in the months and years ahead. The determined single mother who had arrived at that county hearing expecting to lose everything had instead catalyzed a movement that would reshape water rights policy throughout the state and potentially the nation. Her last thought before falling asleep was not of grand policy implications or media attention, but of the western field, the section of her farm that had struggled most severely under the artificial water deprivation. By this time tomorrow, the natural aquifer flow would begin returning to that soil. Seeds that had languished in arid conditions would finally receive the nourishment they needed. The land that her great-grandmother had first cultivated would begin healing from wounds inflicted by corporate greed. In that simple agricultural reality, water returning to soil that needed it, lay the essence of what her stand had been about. Beyond politics, beyond policy, beyond media narratives, the fundamental truth remained. The earth and its resources belong not to distant corporate interests, but to the communities that depended upon them for survival. In remembering and defending that essential principle, Sophia Martinez had done more than save her family farm. She had helped restore a fundamental balance that extended far beyond her sunflower fields. 3 months after Governor Eleanor Vasquez's helicopter landed in Sophia Martinez's sunflower field, the landscape of Valley Ridge Farm had transformed in ways both visible and profound. The once struggling fields now displayed vibrant growth, with irrigation systems operating at full capacity for the first time in years. The western section, nearest the disabled pumping station, showed particularly dramatic recovery, a living testament to how quickly natural systems could heal when deliberate manipulation ceased. Sophia stood at the edge of this rejuvenated field, watching a team of university researchers gather soil and water samples for ongoing documentation of the aquifer's restoration. Their work represented just one aspect of the comprehensive monitoring now established across the property. Valley Ridge Farm, having evolved from a simple agricultural operation into what researchers were calling ground zero for water rights protection reform. The recovery rate exceeds our most optimistic projections, reported Dr. Chen, approaching with tablet in hand. Groundwater levels have stabilized at 87% of historical averages, despite ongoing regional drought conditions. The aquifer system demonstrated remarkable resilience once the artificial diversion ceased. For Sophia, these technical metrics translated to a simpler, more personal reality. Her farm was surviving. The sunflowers that had struggled for years now stood tall and abundant, their bright faces following the sun across clear blue skies. The soil that had grown increasingly arid and unproductive had regained its essential moisture. The well that had slowed to a trickle now pumped with steady strength. "Mom!" Emma called, walking briskly across the field. "The governor's office!" Just confirmed. The Agricultural Water Security Act passed the State Senate Committee unanimously. It's heading for a full-floor vote next week. This legislation, developed with substantial input from Sophia in her role as civilian advisory chair, represented the first comprehensive policy response to the water rights manipulation scheme exposed at Valley Ridge Farm. Its provisions included mandatory transparency for all water management infrastructure, enhanced protection for agricultural water access, and new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent corporate monopolization of critical water resources. The committee chair specifically cited your testimony as decisive, Emma continued, her pride evident. Said your perspective as a working farmer brought clarity to issues that had been deliberately obscured by corporate interests for years. Sophia nodded modestly, still adjusting to her unexpected influence in policy circles. Her straightforward approach, explaining complex water rights issues in practical terms drawn from direct experience, had proven surprisingly effective. In legislative hearings dominated by technical jargon and legal abstractions. "I just told them the truth as we lived it," she replied. "How our farm went from thriving to struggling almost overnight. How every expert told us it was just drought and bad luck. How we nearly lost everything because we couldn't see the deliberate manipulation happening literally underground." Her authentic testimony had indeed proven powerful, cutting through political divisions that typically complicated environmental and agricultural policy. Conservative legislators responded to her emphasis on property rights and family farm preservation, while progressive lawmakers appreciated her focus on corporate accountability and resource protection. The resulting bipartisan support had propelled the legislation forward with unprecedented momentum. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Sophia and Emma passed the newly established Riverdale County Water Monitoring Station, a state-of-the-art facility constructed where the hidden pumping system had once operated. The station, staffed by environmental technicians and equipped with advanced sensing equipment, provided real-time data on aquifer conditions throughout the Eastern Valley, with all information publicly accessible through an online portal. "It's still hard to believe sometimes," Emma mused, looking at the facility that symbolized the dramatic shift from secrecy to transparency. 3 months ago, this site was being used to steal our water. Now it's protecting everyone's access to it. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, a gathering awaited them. Representatives from neighboring farms who had formed the Eastern Valley Agricultural Cooperative, an organization born directly from the community solidarity displayed during Valley Ridge Farm's crisis. What had begun as emergency volunteer assistance had evolved into a structured support network for family farms throughout the region. "The soil amendment program is ready to launch," announced Eduardo Garza, whose orchard had shown remarkable recovery since the water diversion ceased. "We've secured funding for 50 farms to implement regenerative practices that improve water retention and reduce irrigation needs." Maria Williams, whose vegetable operation had nearly failed under artificially induced water stress, added, "And 15 farms have already installed the new monitoring wells that connect to the county early warning system. If anyone tries manipulation like this again, we'll detect it immediately." The cooperative represented one of many constructive developments emerging from what could have been simply a devastating loss. Rather than surrendering to corporate acquisition, the agricultural community had transformed crisis into opportunity, developing collaborative approaches to challenges that individual farmers couldn't address alone. After reviewing cooperative business, the conversation turned to the upcoming State Agricultural Conference, where Sophia would deliver a keynote address about water rights protection. Despite having spoken to numerous official audiences over the past months, she still approached each opportunity with the same mixture of determination and humility. "I'm not a natural public speaker," she admitted to the gathered farmers, "but every time I share our story, more people understand what's at stake, not just for farmers, but for everyone who depends on public control of essential resources." Manuel Diaz, who had lost his farm to Westview Estates 2 years earlier, offered encouragement. "You speak for those of us who never got the chance, Sophia. When you stand at that podium, you're not just one farmer. You're the voice of everyone who faced these powerful interests alone and lost." His words carried particular weight in light of recent developments. The State Attorney General's investigation had expanded to include properties already acquired by Westview Estates and its shell companies, with mounting evidence suggesting the same water manipulation tactics had been employed to devalue numerous farms before acquisition. Discussions had begun regarding potential restitution or even property restoration for farmers who had sold under artificially created duress. Later that afternoon, Governor Vasquez arrived for a scheduled meeting of the Agricultural Water Security Initiative Advisory Board, which now included representatives from farming communities across the state. Meeting in Sophia's renovated barn, transformed into a functional conference space through community effort, the diverse group tackled implementation challenges for the new protection frameworks. The most significant hurdle remains detection, explained Director Rodriguez, who coordinated the technical aspects of the initiative. Water diversion can be difficult to distinguish from natural fluctuations without baseline data and regular monitoring. That's why the cooperative model is so important, Sophia responded, drawing on her practical experience. Farmers know their land intimately. They notice changes that might not register in technical monitoring. We need systems that integrate that lived experience with scientific measurement. Her perspective exemplified the unique value she brought to policy development, bridging the gap between agricultural reality and governmental oversight, ensuring regulations addressed actual threats rather than theoretical concerns. As the meeting concluded, Governor Vasquez requested a private conversation with Sophia. Walking together through sunflower fields now approaching full bloom, the state's highest official and the farm's owner reflected on the unexpected journey they had shared since that dramatic confrontation at the county hearing. The Federal Water Protection Task Force is interested in your input on national guidelines, the governor explained. They've been following our state's response to the Meridian scheme and believe similar tactics may be occurring in agricultural regions nationwide. Sophia absorbed this information with characteristic thoughtfulness. Her influence had already extended far beyond anything she could have imagined when fighting to save her individual farm. The possibility of helping shape national water policy represented yet another expansion of her unexpected public role. I never planned to become an advocate, she reflected. I just wanted to keep farming the land my family has worked for generations. That's precisely why your voice matters, the governor replied. Too many policies are shaped by people who've never worked the land they regulate. Your practical wisdom brings a perspective that's been largely missing from these discussions. As Governor Vasquez departed and evening approached, Sophia found herself drawn once again to the western field, the section whose dramatic recovery most visibly demonstrated the transformation of the past 3 months. Standing amid thriving sunflowers that stretched toward the setting sun, she thought about the generations of women who had stewarded this land before her. Her great-grandmother had established the farm during the Great Depression, creating something, enduring from nothing through sheer determination. Her grandmother had modernized operations during the post-war agricultural revolution, adapting to changing markets while maintaining the farm's fundamental character. Her mother had navigated the farm crisis of the 1980s, preserving their independence, when corporate consolidation claimed many neighboring properties. Now, Sophia had faced her own generational challenge, defending the farm against a sophisticated scheme to monopolize the water that gave it life. Like the resilient women before her, she had found strength she didn't know she possessed when her heritage was threatened. Unlike them, however, her individual stand had connected to something larger, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond Valley Ridge Farm. Emma joined her mother in the field, the evening light gilding the sunflowers surrounding them. Their relationship had evolved through this shared crisis. The daughter's academic knowledge and the mother's practical experience combining to create understanding neither could have achieved alone. "I've been thinking about my scholarship," Emma said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The environmental science program still wants me, but they've suggested something different. A specialized focus on agricultural water systems with Valley Ridge Farm as my primary research site." Sophia turned to her daughter with surprise. "You'd be staying here?" Emma nodded, her expression reflecting both determination and hope. "What we've learned here matters, Mom. The university sees value in documenting everything, the aquifer, recovery, the cooperative development, the policy implementation. I could continue my education while helping strengthen what we've started. For Sophia, this unexpected development represented something perhaps more meaningful than policy influence or public recognition, the continuation of family connection to the land. When she had faced foreclosure 3 months earlier, she had mourned not just personal loss, but the breaking of an intergenerational chain. Emma's decision suggested that chain would remain unbroken, though perhaps evolving in ways her ancestors couldn't have imagined. "This farm has always adapted to changing times," Sophia replied, embracing her daughter. "Your great-great-grandmother would be proud to see it becoming both a working agricultural operation and a center for research and advocacy." As twilight deepened, they walked back toward the farmhouse, passing the collaborative projects that symbolized the farm's transformation. The monitoring station, the cooperative equipment shed, the renovated barn that now hosted everything, from policy meetings to agricultural workshops for local students. What had begun as a simple family farm had evolved into something more complex and interconnected, reflecting the interdependence that had always existed but had often gone unrecognized. Inside, Sophia found several messages waiting: a request from a national farming organization for her to address their annual convention, an interview query from a major environmental journal, a notification that the state attorney general would announce significant developments in the Meridian investigation the following day. As Sophia watched the ceremonial signing alongside other advisory board members, she reflected on the extraordinary journey from crisis to transformation. The farm that had faced imminent foreclosure now operated with renewed productivity and purpose. The community that had rallied around her family had developed sustainable cooperative structures that strengthened all participating farms. The water rights that had been deliberately undermined were now protected by multiple layers of transparency and oversight. After the formal ceremony, Attorney General Montgomery approached with news about the ongoing investigation. "We've identified 17 additional properties where Meridian implemented similar diversion tactics before acquisition," she explained quietly. "The evidence is strong enough that we're initiating proceedings to invalidate those sales and potentially restore properties to original owners where appropriate." This development, the possibility that other farmers might recover land lost through deliberate manipulation, represented justice extending beyond Valley Ridge Farm to the broader agricultural community. For Sophia, whose compassion for neighboring farmers had been evident from the beginning, this potential restoration held particular significance. Later that evening, Sophia received another visitor at the farm, Blake Westfield, the former CEO of Westview Estates, who had provided extensive testimony about Meridian's operations in exchange for consideration in his own case. His arrival was unexpected and initially unwelcome, but Sophia's innate sense of fairness compelled her to hear what he had come to say. "I wanted to apologize personally," Westfield began, visibly uncomfortable, standing in the kitchen where Sophia had once despaired over foreclosure notices facilitated by his company's actions. "I've had a lot of time to reflect on the harm we caused, not just to your farm, but to the entire community." Sophia listened silently, her expression neutral as he continued. "I joined Meridian because I believed their narrative about efficient resource management. It took too long for me to recognize the exploitation behind the corporate buzzwords. By the time I understood what we were really doing, I was already compromised, already participating in something I couldn't easily escape." His explanation wasn't a justification, and he didn't present it as such. Rather, it offered insight into how ordinary professionals could become entangled in destructive systems through incremental ethical compromises. "What will you do now?" Sophia asked, her first word since his arrival. "I'm working with the Water Rights Task Force, he replied, helping them identify similar schemes in other regions. The patterns are consistent once you know what to look for. My knowledge of corporate tactics is being used to prevent what I once facilitated. This transformation, from agent of exploitation to contributor to protection, reflected the broader changes rippling outward from the Valley Ridge farm case. Accountability was essential, but so was the redirection of expertise toward constructive purposes. 1 year to the day after Governor Vasquez's helicopter landed in Sophia's sunflower field, Valley Ridge Farm hosted a gathering unlike any in its long history. Representatives from agricultural communities across the state joined environmental advocates, water policy experts, and government officials for the inaugural conference of the Rural Resource Protection Network, an organization born directly from the cooperative efforts that began with Sophia's stand against foreclosure. The farm's western field, once the site of hidden water diversion, now featured demonstration plots showcasing drought-resistant cultivation techniques and water conservation approaches developed through collaboration between farmers and university researchers. The barn that had been in disrepair during the farm's financial struggle now served as a community education center, hosting workshops on everything from water rights law to regenerative agricultural practices. As Sophia welcomed attendees to the conference, she reflected on the journey of the past year, from desperate defensive action to proactive community empowerment. What began as one farm's fight for survival has evolved into something much more significant, she told the gathered participants. We've discovered that the most effective protection against resource exploitation isn't just better laws or monitoring technology. It's informed communities working together with shared purpose. Emma, who had successfully balanced her university studies with active participation in the farm's ongoing transformation, added her perspective on the integration of academic knowledge with practical agricultural experience. The solutions we need already exist within our communities, she explained to an attentive audience. Sometimes they're found in traditional farming wisdom passed down through generations. Sometimes they emerge from scientific research or technological innovation. The key is bringing these knowledge sources together rather than treating them as separate or opposed. Throughout the day, workshops and panel discussions address the challenges facing rural communities in an era of increasing resource pressure. Rather than focusing solely on defensive measures against corporate exploitation, the conference emphasized proactive approaches to sustainable resource management and community resilience. Manuel Diaz, who had recently regained ownership of his family farm through the Attorney General's restitution program, led a session on rebuilding after displacement. Losing our land nearly broke our family's spirit, he acknowledged candidly. But returning with new knowledge and community support has allowed us to farm better than before. Sometimes the path forward requires first experiencing what you're willing to fight for. By evening, as participants gathered for a community dinner in the fields between rows of thriving sunflowers, the conversation had shifted from specific policy measures to deeper questions about the relationship between rural communities and the resources that sustain them. What we're really talking about is values, observed Judge Oakes, whose preserved water surveys had provided crucial evidence in the initial investigation. Do we view water, land, and food primarily as commodities to be acquired and controlled for profit? Or do we recognize them as essential elements of community well-being that require shared stewardship? For Sophia Martinez, hosting this gathering, on land that had nearly been lost to corporate acquisition, represented the completion of an extraordinary cycle. The farm that had been threatened by resource exploitation had become a center for resource protection. The family facing foreclosure had become catalysts for community empowerment. The hidden manipulation that had nearly destroyed her livelihood had been exposed and transformed into transparent safeguards benefiting countless others. As darkness fell and lanterns illuminated the gathered community, Sophia took a moment away from the festivities to walk alone through the western field. The section whose dramatic recovery most visibly demonstrated the transformation of the past year. Standing amid moonlit sunflowers that stretched skyward like silent sentinels, she thought about the power of persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. What she couldn't possibly have known that desperate morning at the county hearing was that her determination to save one family farm would ultimately help protect agricultural communities throughout the state. The single mother who had been silenced by procedural manipulation had found her voice, and in doing so had amplified the voices of countless others facing similar threats to their way of life. The farm that had sustained 4 generations of her family would now continue nurturing future generations, not just through agricultural production, but through education, advocacy, and community building. The hidden water beneath her fields, once diverted through corporate manipulation, now flowed freely again, both literally through restored natural systems and metaphorically through transparent information sharing and collaborative stewardship. As Sophia returned to the gathering, where Emma was engaged in animated conversation with young farmers from across the state, she carried with her a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the preservation of her family's heritage, but for the unexpected opportunities that had emerged from crisis. The struggle that could have ended with personal loss had instead catalyzed community strength. The forces that had threatened to destroy had ultimately inspired creation. What had begun with a governor's helicopter landing in her sunflower field had blossomed into something far more significant than one farm's survival. It had grown into a movement rooted in the fundamental understanding that the Earth's resources belong not to those with the most power to exploit them, but to the communities that depend upon them for life. An understanding as old as agriculture itself, yet revolutionary in a world increasingly driven by resource commodification and corporate control. In that understanding lay both Sophia Martinez's personal legacy and the broader transformation her stand had inspired, a legacy not of individual heroism, but of community awakening to the power of standing together in defense of the land and water that sustain us all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.